For 2 weeks this month and 2 weeks next month, Sue and I are going to be taking us back to the 4 agreements. You may be asking, why? Why now? Remember, our theme this year is 2020, perfect vision, seeing through a spiritual lens. And the 4 agreements is written by Don Miguel Ruiz, who is a Toltec master. And the Toltecs are a people, it's a 3,000-year-old movement where they researched and preserved the historical spiritual teachings. And one of the things that you'll see over and over again in different spiritual paths is the belief that we do not see reality clearly. That we have taken on not only our own beliefs from our parents and teachers, from ministers and Sunday school teachers, but that there is what Charles Fillmore called a race consciousness, or a collective consciousness, that we took on as kids, a very complicated set of rules of what you can and can't do that we had to maneuver through, and that create a lens that we are not seeing reality clearly through. In the Toltec tradition, they call it the smoky mirror, that life is supposed to be reflecting for us love and light, but we each have a smoky mirror, so it's hard to see, to experience that love and light in the world around us. Not readily apparent. And so the first agreement is to be impeccable with our word. And impeccability means without sin. And a sin is, I should say before we read this, in unity, we usually define sin in a very broad term that the archers used. Sin is to miss the mark. So anytime we are living not in alignment with who we are as spiritual beings, we're in sin. And we can pull ourselves out of sin. We can remove sin from the situation the minute we align back with who we are. But Don Miguel brings that definition in much tighter when he says, a sin is anything that you do that goes against yourself. Anything you do that goes against yourself. When you're impeccable, you take responsibility for your actions, but you do not judge or blame yourself. So, be impeccable with your word says that we're to come from the love and the light that we are, and not fall into that trap of condemning ourselves, of judging ourselves, of being harsh with ourselves. And of course, why word? Well, if you've been in unity for any length of time, you know the power of the word, that it is the word and the use of the word that we clarify the ideas that we have, that we begin to give them clothing. We begin to bring them manifest into the world. It's a terrific gift that we as human beings have been given in this evolution of humanity, a gift that no other living expression on the planet has. The gift of speech, the gift of the word. And so, when he says live impeccably, we are to use our words to align with love and truth. That sounds easy enough, right? But a big challenge is that we don't even recognize that we don't know our truth, that we regularly lie out of ignorance, because this system of beliefs, or what the Toltecs call the book of laws, that we started getting indoctrinated in the minute we were born. And we're rewarded for following the laws, and we're punished when we don't. Carol, can you bring this up? The reward feels good, and we keep doing what others want us to do in order to get the reward. With that fear of being punished and the fear of not getting the reward, we start pretending to be what we are not, just to please others, just to be good enough for someone else. We pretend to be what we are not because we're afraid of being rejected. The fear of being rejected becomes the fear of not being good enough. Eventually, we become something we are not. That's the key. Eventually, we become something we are not. We become a copy of mama's beliefs, daddy's beliefs, society's beliefs, and religion's beliefs. And we're unconscious to it. On top of that, we have the mechanism of the judge. I talk about the judge a lot. It was fun that Don Miguel talks about the judge. Remember, the judge is there to keep us in alignment with this book of laws, to keep us living in something the judge feels comfortable with. And, I'm always describing the judge, but check out how he describes the judge. The inner judge uses what is in our book of law to judge everything we do and don't do, everything we think and don't think, and everything we feel and don't feel. Everything lives under the tyranny of the judge. Every time we do something that goes against the book of law, the judge says we are guilty. We need to be punished. We should be ashamed. This happens many times a day, day after day, for all the years of our lives. That's pretty accurate. And much more succinctly put than I could put. And so remember that you're not powerless to the judge. And if we are going to be impeccable to our word, we have to take on the judge at some point. Because how can you be living from love and truth if you're constantly being judged? It just doesn't work. Instead, you're brought back into alignment with the lie, with the book of rules that you're to follow. Seemed like there was one other. Oh. Well, it'll come eventually. I'll look at my notes. Oh, so Don Miguel, I know, here's what it is. So you have to be prepared that to live this agreement, to be impeccable with your words, that you are going to be stepping out of what's acceptable to your judge. You will be judged. You need to anticipate it. And you may be judged by the people around you because the book of laws is universally accepted. And so it takes a good deal of courage, a good deal of strength, a good deal of focus to take on this agreement. Now Miguel uses the analogy of a garden and says that we are really dealing with the garden of our consciousness. How many of you have planted a garden in an area where a garden had not been planted before? Yeah. Usually it's full already. It's full of, and I'll tell you, my mother had the great idea that we should plant the ditch across from our cabin in Clear Lake. Our yard was heavily covered by trees, still is, but the ditch was open. But we couldn't just go back there and throw seeds in the ditch. There were long grasses that would have kept those seeds shaded. There were all sorts of weeds that would have choked out their roots. So we needed to go in and we needed to prepare the area, prepare the soil. And Don Miguel talks about the same thing, that there needs to be space in our consciousness, but just as important, we need to know what kind of seeds grow well in our garden, in the soil of our garden. What seeds does our garden tend to nourish? Are they seeds of love or seeds of fear? A good friend of mine reached out to me and we had lunch this week. I say a good friend. She'd sort of fallen off the map for the last 2 years. At lunch, she explained what had happened, that she's become, what you might say, addicted to the news, that she has a lot of fear up these days about something horrible happening, and that she needs to know about it, needs to be able to be prepared for something horrible happening. And she said, without really using the same, not understanding this context, she said to me, I realize that I'm just immersing myself in fear. And that I needed to set a boundary with those seeds. So she cut down her news watching to a half an hour a day. She gave herself permission to watch a half an hour a day. And then she says, and now I'm reconnecting with friends like you to be reminded that humanity is good, that humanity can be trusted, that while on the global scene I'm not seeing a lot of good, that face to face, person to person, we are the expression of love. Do you see? She's acknowledging that the soil of her consciousness easily grew fear. You just had to sort of drop a little seedling of fear in there, and it was nourished and propagated. But that's not what she wanted to grow there. And so while it may take a little work, while may it take some focus, while she may have to pull some weeds, right, that creep in there, she wants to focus on her soil being ripe and supportive of ideas of love and truth. What is the soil in your garden like? And how have you oriented your life so that you can be more? Sherry, I bet you just leaned against the wall and turned all the lights off. We've got it up here, I think. Yeah, here it comes. Another great acronym, right? The darkness. So my mother sent me an interesting story that I want to share with you. A man and his wife were sitting in the living room of their house, and he just turned to her and spontaneously said, "Honey, just so you know, I never want to live in a vegetative state, dependent on some machine or fluids from a bottle. If that happens, just please pull the plug." Without giving it another thought, the woman stood up, walked over and unplugged the TV. Took the bottle of beer from his hand and poured it down the sink. Do you see that without knowing it, this man was, well, I think we can say that. He was being impeccable with his word. He didn't think that he meant right now, but at some level, he was putting it out there. But the key was his wife, because she recognized that there was a vegetative state happening. Maybe it was happening for her too. And do you recognize that sometimes we don't want to use our words, we want to use our actions, because she could have started nagging him about being, addicted to the TV or whatever, but instead she went over and acted out of truth and unplugged the TV, took the bottle of beer, poured it down the sink, didn't have to say a word. But it's important to understand, she may have been criticized and judged for that, right? that her husband may not have seen the truth in that moment. And you all recognize the tremendous gift, the opportunity to wake out of the smoky mirror, that she was wiping the mirror for him a little bit. This is the opportunity that we have to do for one another, to come from that love, and to recognize that the ego defines love as a fairly black and white experience. If you're going to be loving, you're going to be nice, you're going to be sweet, you're going to be warm, you're going to put yourself second before anyone else. That's the ego's interpretation of. We're talking here about divine love, which is far more complex. Divine love is about the truth and is supported with and imbued with the truth. And so when we're willing to speak the truth of the moment out of love, which sometimes means setting boundaries, right? Which sometimes means unplugging the TV. It sometimes means irritating the one we're with. But in that, we're freeing one another. We're breaking out of the book of laws. We're being shook and awakened. It's an incredible role to play, but we all know the danger of it, especially the part of us that doesn't want to be rejected, that just wants to be accepted and loved. So, Don Luis brings up the subject of gossip. He has this to say: gossip has become the main form of communication in human society. It's become the way that we feel close to each other because it makes us feel better to see someone else feel as badly as we do. This next one really got to me. Consider how many times you've gossiped about the person that you love the most to gain the support of others for your point of view. How many times have you hooked other people's attention and spread poison about your loved one in order to make your opinion right? Ouch. And I'm sure I'm the only one, but I'm guilty of doing that. You know, it's... And so, what I really got to see, I'm looking for ways to apply this, right? And I got to see we could start just with that. We could start by saying, okay, I'm going to embrace being impeccable by my words. Start that embracing by stopping to gossip. And you see, we can spread the definition of gossip. I think most of us think, as long as I'm talking positively about someone, I'm not gossiping. But really, Don Luis says that when we're in the field with someone else, when you're face to face with someone, that you should keep the conversation focused on the two of you. And I love to share the good news about you guys. What's happening in your lives? I know a lot of it. And someone will ask about, oh, did you know they're doing this and that? But think of how much more connection I'm fostering when I say, great things are going on in their life and you should reach out to them. Because we have become insular. I'm more familiar with my device than any of you. And I know some of you very well, but I'm on that darn device every day, working it. When we meet face to face with someone, it has that effect of planting positive, loving seeds in the garden of our consciousness. But here's the other impact of that, and Rachel nailed it for us at the staff meeting. She said, but you're going to find there's not a lot to talk about. And we don't spend much time in the quiet. This month is Black History Awareness Month. Is that right? Do I have it? Black History Month. Did you guys know that Della Reese was a Unity person? Do you guys know who Della Reese is? Touched by an Angel was a show she was in. She came up through the Unity movement. I think she was actually ordained, but I'm now not sure of it. I said that first service, but now I'm not sure. Anyway, Della had Della's sayings. One of them I just loved. We have a tendency in this society to make conversation. There's something about the stillness that frightens us. We must fill up that void. And that our opportunity then is to develop some comfort with that quiet stillness. Because you see, it's from there that we are clearing out the garden so that whatever it is that God wants to plant can have space. One of the things that I've realized, I'm working on my review, and they asked, well, how do you think your talks have been? It's very hard for me, especially in the last year, to reflect on how my talks have been, because I'm moving more and more squarely into just abiding in this spacious, quiet place where there's not much of the familiar Scott for me. And I honestly can't even remember what I said in the talk. I have without a familiar sort of ego self that's always comparing, I don't really know how I did. It's nice, after the first service, several people said, "You're doing fine." But do you see, it is from that spacious, quiet place that all creativity can happen. It really doesn't happen from a full mind. We end up just recreating what we saw someone else create, or we're not being very genuinely on the edge, creating what it is that we're inspired to create by this mystery that we call God. And so, stop gossiping. It is the path to enlightenment. Don Miguel ends the book with a phrase that I want to take to task, with a quote that I want to take to task. Be impeccable with your word. Use the word to share your love. Begin with yourself. Tell yourself how wonderful you are, how great you are. Tell yourself how much you love yourself. Use the words to break all those teeny tiny agreements that make you suffer. I love the idea. He says that it worked for him. Here's why I want to take it to task. I grew up in Unity. I wasn't born in Unity, but we started going to Unity when I was 8. No joke, if I haven't done 1 million, I've probably done 5 million affirmations in my life. I grew up in a church. The Unity Church was all about affirmation and denial. I mean, it was crazy how many we said, right? And I went to seminary when I was 30. And I was in what do they call it? A Life of Prayer with Debbie Tyson, and she's talking about the power of prayer and the power of affirmation for changing your life. And I made an appointment with her. I said, okay, I have been practicing this stuff for years, and I still live with a great deal of fear. How come affirmation and denial is not changing my fear? How come prayer is not changing my fear? She was crystal clear. She said, Scott, affirmation and prayer are to remind you of the truth, but you still need to do your work. You still need to get in there and see why you're afraid. You need to, through that awareness, begin to transcend that. It's a great support and a reminder, but it is not a replacement for the work. And so if your soul is one of those souls where all you have to do is tell yourself you love yourself about 100,000 times and it works, great. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that it must be working, it must be working. I'm now on 200,000, it's going to work. Just take a moment to look at, why am I reacting the way I'm reacting? Who in me is reacting? What nature are they? How did they get developed in me? That kind of awareness begins to bring words that free us. We're able to attune to what's really going on for us, and support that part, love that part. Don Miguel says that being impeccable with our word is really self-love. I forgot to tell you. Oh, I'm not going to take that blame for that. Spirit forgot to tell you. When we saw that definition of impeccability, and it was all about loving ourselves, I thought it was a little narcissistic when I first read it. It's all about me. But Don Miguel beautifully expands it in the chapter for us to understand that when we do or say something that upsets another, when we come from something other than, and when I mean upset, I mean that's purposely hurtful, that comes out of our own anger, for example, that then leaves that person feeling anything but love for us. They may be frustrated with us, angry with us, hateful towards us, and that is not loving ourselves. When we do actions that cause people to intentionally be angry, hurtful, hate us, we're not loving ourselves. And so when we love ourselves, we are then able to interact with people quite easily, effortlessly, through love. From that place, we change our life and we change the world around us. I want to invite you to begin to prepare your love offerings as we invite Leonard back up to wow us.